off to a good start. Welcome everyone to the Big Book Study Workshop. We will be keeping everyone muted for the duration of the workshop with the exception of the facilitators, Tony.R, Joe C, and myself, Joanne C. This is not a conventional AA meeting where we share experience, strength, and hope with each other. This is a Big Book Study Workshop, the purpose of which is to take members of AA through the program of recovery as it's laid out in our basic text, Alcoholics Anonymous, or more commonly known as the Big Book. We will not be referencing any other literature or versions of the 12 steps. Our aim is to help educate and challenge your beliefs about the program of recovery, so we might sift through some of the inaccuracies that circulate within our fellowship. Our aim is to challenge current beliefs by comparing them to what our basic text says. We simply wish to educate those who want to know more about the program of recovery. Please feel free to ask questions in the Zoom chat feature. We will try periodically to answer any relevant questions as we go along. Anyone behaving inappropriately or in an abusive manner will be removed from the workshop. If we can't discern you from somebody else who's behaving inappropriately in the chat because your name is too generic, either it's iPhone or Samsung or some other generic name, you might run the risk of being bounced out of the workshop and out of the meeting for the rest of the evening. So do us a favor and change your name to your first name and your last initial now, so you can stay and participate. Tony?
Right on. Recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to welcome everybody. Sobriety date's April 8, 1989. Joe, why don't you start us off with a set-aside prayer? You got to unmute yourself, Joe.
Sorry, just bouncing people. My name is Joe. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Joe.
We'll be starting off tonight with the set-aside prayer. Goes a little something like, Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my illness, these steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me to see the truth. Thanks.
Awesome. Last week we covered a tough topic. We agnostics were on how it works tonight. The summary of how we agnostics is, and they talk about on 44, is in the preceding chapters you've learned something of alcoholism. So hopefully by now you've diagnosed yourself what type of alcoholic you are and whether you're in need of this psychic change or spiritual experience. And if you are, the book's kind of, we agnostics is kind of more personal depending where you are with this thing. It's pretty hard for a group or a set of people to take you through this, right? Because we don't know where you are, what you're thinking, or preconceived ideas or prejudice, where you are as an agnostic, atheist, or true believer. But the basis of it is lack of power is our dilemma they talked about on page 45. And then they went on to explain that we can't create this change necessary, this psychic change or spiritual experience. And the bare minimum to be open-minded enough that they talked about in the spiritual appendix is be open-minded enough that the possibility I could obtain this thing by doing what they did. So the bare minimum they talked about all the way through here is the willingness to shift my thinking to be willing to believe that there is a power greater. And we don't have to define that now. But the access is, if I get access to this power, it'll become personal to me later. All they're saying now is lack of power is our dilemma. Where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's what this book is about, right? And then they talk about, well, where is this power located? They actually talk about on 55, the basis of our understanding collectively is, they talk about actually we're fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by prompt, by worship of other things, but in some form or another it was there, for faith in a power greater than ourselves, and a miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. So they're explaining this thing, this life force is already within you. It's always been there. We're going to teach you how to tap into it where it becomes more personal on a consistent basis. And we all agree that's this thing that we tapped into in the spiritual appendix. So what this book is about is to enable me to have an experience with this power that will create this change. So the first thing that happens is it my connection with this power or a psychic change? What's the first thing that happens? Is it a psychic change or is it a connection with this power? Right? So we see how many people would say psychic change. Just kind of raise your hand in the thing. but we actually see it's the result of my connection to source. So the byproduct of that, right, or a symptom of that, is a psychic change or spiritual experience. So they've covered in great detail now what the problem is, what the solution is, and what the course of action is. Now they're going to navigate us through the rest of the course of action, and they're going to explain some oversights or some overviews on what this is all about. So how it works, chapter 5. You guys want to add anything to that, or?
No.
No.
So, how it works. Joanne, do you want to enlighten us with that, or are you just having a long pause in between thoughts?
Page 58. Chapter 5. How it works.
Good to see you, sunshine. Okay.
Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path.
Okay, so where's this path? What path are they talking about? So that'd be a good question. Hey, where's this path they're talking about, and what is this path? What is the path that they're talking about?
And the chat is closed until further notice because we got bombed pretty hard, so they can't reply in there.
Okay, so we'll see that the path is actually a spiritual kit of tools laid at our feet, or the information outlined in this book, right? So this is the instructions to get us to the spiritual path. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path, is the spiritual approach to this path, right? Because a lot of people can go through this mechanically without the experience. A lot of people get great knowledge about the book and about the steps and discipline, mechanics of it without the experience of it, right? Okay?
Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program.
So how many groups of people do not recover? Joe, you want to hit us up on that one? How many people do not recover here?
Those who cannot be honest with themselves.
And those who
cannot or will not.
Yeah, and those who won't give themselves to this simple program. It's so simple, it's complicated. Right? Because we have two alternatives. One is to accept spiritual help and get off the path we're on, or stay on the path we're on and die an alcoholic death. Right? We actually think that's something that should take time to think about. Okay, they're not at fault. Oh, they're such unfortunates.
Well, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty.
So right now, what are the two things we need to be totally honest with and concede to? What are the two things that we really need to adhere to and do a complete, utter, in agreement with?
The symptoms of alcoholism.
Yeah, and so the first one is that I have the allergy, and the second one is I have this malady that we read about on page 23 that lies dormant in my mind that places me beyond human aid. A lot of people cannot admit to that. They cannot see that they won't be able to take care of this one time or another. Anybody know people have been relapsing for years? They get sober and everything's fantastic because they can't make that admission of being beyond human aid. They think it's some form of behavior or some discipline that they'll be able to get at this time based on themselves. Does that kind of make sense? Because there's only two ideas being presented so far, right? And we need to be honest about these two other things. These two things only, okay?
They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders.
And most of us are here tonight.
Yep. What are you trying to say?
Nothing.
I told you I brought all my personalities.
That's it. That's why there's principles before personalities. It's our own personalities, not the people around us.
But many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now.
So our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, not what it was like. When I talk about it was like, a lot of people wouldn't get identification with it. But if I talk what I was like, in regards to Bill's story, he talked about his inability to get sober. He talked about these symptoms being reoccurring and all his efforts in trying to fix this thing and how baffled he was about that, right? But if he talked about being a stockbroker and his marriage, I wouldn't identify with any of that. But when he talked about his struggles with alcoholism, it got my attention. So if we talked about our struggles with alcoholism, well, when I drank, I triggered the phenomenon of craving. What does that mean? I got thirstier and all kinds of trouble because I couldn't control the amounts I drank, right? And then when I wanted to stop, I found I couldn't stop. How many people identify with that? How many people identify with, well, one of my last benders, the riot police showed up with gear and all that other stuff. And so that's a totally different story, right? Okay. So what we were like, what happened? So are they able to do the chat now, Joe?
No.
Okay, so the what happened part, most people think it's my last drunk, my surrender, my acceptance, my treatment center, my coming to AA. That's not the what happened part. In Bill's story, what was that what happened part that gave him a different story? Was the course of action he took, enabling him to have a psychic change or spiritual experience as the result of his relationship that this course of action got him. So he got this relationship, and the psychic change was a byproduct of that. So that was the what happened part. And then they talked about what he was like afterwards, how he applied these spiritual principles to overcome self.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
You can.
So while we have the chat shut off, one of the great things about the Big Book Study Workshop is that it has a tendency to challenge, even if you've been in the fellowship for a considerable period of time, maybe you've been sober for a few years, it has a great way of challenging your beliefs and your ideas. So even though we're not able to use the chat at the moment, when Tony asks a question, do yourself a favor, write down your answer. And then when we go over what the book has to say about it, see if your answer matches what the book has to say. And you can start to get a sense of where you're getting your information from and whether or not it's grounded in the program of recovery of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps.
And what is it that we have? Not only a solution for alcoholism, but it's a way of life that answers all our problems. It's a contentment, a happiness, a joy, a peace. It's something that is available to everybody who seeks it, which is pretty wild. We read the promises all the time. It's this internal shift there where we're comfortable within our own skin and we're not tormented by our subconscious all the time. That the chatter actually subsides, that we are able to match calamity with serenity. They talk about this, it's so much more than not drinking, right? They talk about a profound alteration to life, right? That even you will be amazed with what's available for you when you experience it. You'll be amazed before you're halfway through. If you're not amazed with your story and where you're at and what's happening, then maybe there's a different experience for you as we go through this.
At some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way.
Nobody in this group, eh? So what's an easier, softer way? Anything other than doing it out of here.
Yeah.
Anything. Yeah. Just meetings, makers, make it. Boy, wouldn't that be nice if that worked? How many people would like to, if I just went to meetings and it took care of my alcoholism? My mental condition is something else. You ever walk into a room and you could just feel the presence of mental health? You just feel it. You ever been in those rooms? And then you realize you're alone? No. Sorry, go ahead. Behave yourself, Joanne. Okay.
Probably not. But we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely.
What's an old idea? That this time it's going to be different. This time I mean it. This time, this time, this time. Anything based on me is an old idea. An old idea is, look how successful I was the last time. Or I'll do this, or I'll do that, or there's some way I'll be able to look after my problem. Because what's our first obsession? Ourselves. So new ideas would have to be grounded in something other than me. They talked about that when we talk about willing to change our point of view. It means you have to have another point of view available to us. Most of us don't have another point of view other than our own. So all the way through here, they're offering us a different point of view that we need to conform to be a part of the collective. If you want what we have, I need to understand what it is that you have and how you got it. If I don't understand what it is you have and how you got it, will I be able to obtain it? Right?
No.
So rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. How do you know if you've done this? You could show somebody else how to do it. If you can't show somebody else how to do it and you think you've done it, that's an old idea. Right? A lot of us think, oh, I've done the steps before. And you got loaded. I don't think you did the steps before. You did a version or some idea, something. An old idea is, I've done this. Right? Well, has your sobriety date changed since you've done this? And the answer is yes. Then you haven't done this, because rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path, maintained it, and continued it. But you need to know what that is, okay?
Remember that we deal with alcohol. Cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us.
So what's the most important part of that, what we just read?
You want me to tell you?
Yeah, write down the answer, what you'd say. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. So if somebody was to walk up to you in a meeting and said, hey, what do they mean by that? What's the most important part of that statement? Right? It would be, yeah, go ahead, John.
Well, what's the most important part of the statement? Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Most of you have probably written down cunning, baffling, and powerful. But I think it's probably worth mentioning that they're asking you to remember that we deal with something that we can't remember we're dealing with, right? Yeah,
remember you can't remember. Remember? That's what they're saying. Remember you can't remember. Remember, and when you do remember, it's usually by your second drink. Oh my God, I'm not supposed to be doing this. Because we have a malady, a thing that centers in our mind that lies dormant, and when it becomes present again, we're drinking. So I cannot provide the defense necessary. A lot of people think remember means, oh, remember these things before I drink. So then that's an old idea again, that I will be able to be my own defense against that next drink if I just remember or play the tape through or get up and remind myself every morning that I'm alcoholic. How many people want to spend the rest of their lives having to go through life like that? No. Because that's not what we're offering. We're offering a solution here laid out by those who went before us that remove the problem, removes alcoholism. It no longer becomes your concern. What becomes your concern is this relationship that's available to us through accessing this power through this course of action. So what I worry about today is, where am I with this relationship? Whatever you want to call it, creative intelligence, whatever is secondary, what you call it, the experience of accessing this thing deep down within that becomes a working part of my life that they talked about in the back of the spiritual appendix, right? Go ahead.
Yes. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now.
Now, when's now?
Right now.
Now, so where is this? Where's this power? Where's this thing? Now they call it God, so you can interpret creative and intelligent, whatever you want, frequency, but we all understand the basis of that is this power that we get access to deep down within. Because you went through, we agnostics, it doesn't matter what people call it. You can call it a peanut butter and jam sandwich. You're okay with that because you understand it's the what holds the essence together, holds the two pieces of bread together. Even if this was a course of action that says you had to come to believe that a peanut butter and jam sandwich, people would start arguing about the bread. Well, I'm lactose, or I'm gluten-free. Oh, I don't like it. They start arguing about the bread instead of realizing it's the nutrition, it's the life force that enables me to continue through life, right? So, this power, where does it reside? Deep down within. May you find him now. What's the most helpful prayer? Show me. Okay, I'm in. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon.
What's the turning point? Joe?
The two alternatives.
Sorry, Tom, just putting people off still, brother.
Okay, that's okay. So, Joanne, the turning point would be making my decision based on steps 1 and 2. Where do I go from here? What's after 1 and 2?
Step 3.
Step 3. So I'm at the turning. Do I need to find an alternate way of living? Because the decision in itself is not enough to create change. A lot of people get confused with that. So steps 1, 2 is information steps. Step 3 I'm getting ready to do is a decision. Do I find this alternate course of action that will save me from myself, or do I go on to the bitter end? So that means what they're getting ready to talk about here is half measures avail us nothing. Why? Because I need this psychic change or spiritual experience. I need to form a relationship with this power. Our more religious members call it a God consciousness. I call it a life force that we're all connected to, right? If you don't think you have a life force in you, hold your nose and try to stop yourself from breathing. See how long you can do it for. Something will override that. Your instinct will override for survival. You'll also hear people say, oh, I didn't have the jam to kill myself. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to have the jam to kill you. It's a life force. We want something more than we've ever experienced, right? How many people are looking forward to death here? No, it's about living. Sorry, go ahead.
Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable.
So, who took these steps? They took the steps. So here are the steps we took. Who took? Everybody who's done this course of action since they laid it out in the book. So it'd be a past statement. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, not are. They're talking in past tense. If you haven't done this course of action yet, you're talking in present tense. Right? Because do you have a solution to this problem yet? They have. They've been through this course of action. They're outlining it, right? So now we understand what makes them powerless over alcohol. What made them powerless over alcohol was how many symptoms, too. And what made them unmanageable? What's the unmanageability they talk about? The inability to stay sober. Wouldn't that be unmanageable? If you can't stay sober, wouldn't that be a form of unmanageability? And if you're a prey to misery and depression and plagued with your own thinking and emotional state, your human condition, wouldn't that be unmanageable? How many people has been plagued here with the human condition? Yeah. How many people still, your thinking's not your best friend? If you had somebody talking to you half the time the way you talk to you, would you invite them in for coffee every morning? Well, some of you wait at the table for them to show up. Hey, good to see you again. Where were we? With kicking my ass. Sorry. Unmanageable. The inability to manage my own thinking, emotions, and feelings, and then coupled with the inability to stay sober. Would you call that a little beep beep? So, yeah, I found that kind of interesting. Okay.
Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity.
And we've done that, right? So we understand through going through a course of action. So here's some fun stuff. So what's the conclusion of step 1?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, what's the conclusion of step 1 in step 1?
That without a solution, an alcoholic will drink again.
Yeah, is drinking. That's the step 1 promise. So now they're saying there's a solution to that is step 2. Through a course of action, we could obtain a psychic change or spiritual experience. What confirms step 2? What's the confirmation of step 2? Step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we realized the course of action that they talked about in step 2 was for me to access this power that creates the change. What's the solution of step 2? The solution of step 2 is from 3 to 11. By the time you get to 12, the change has already happened as the result of these steps. Step 12 is now what are we going to do with this change? We're going to go forward and practice these principles in all our affairs and carry this message. So what confirms step 2 is actually step 12. Because in step 2, it's an idea, it's a possibility, right? And then in step 12, it says as the result of what? This course of action. So it's not about me talking about my relationship in step 2. It's about an idea through a course of action that I could enter this experience with this power that creates this psychic change. That's why step 11 talks about later, when this happens, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. We have an experience what they mean by that, and we don't use our own terminology or wording or story around that. Okay?
Step number 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him.
So a decision is a decision. Nothing really happens. And when we get to step 3, you'll see it's an idea. Right? It says that right in there. It's just an idea. An idea of what? That I could obtain this relationship with Source, with power that becomes personal to me through a course of action. Well, what confirms step 3? What confirms the possibility of this relationship with this power that becomes personal to me, this thing that already resides within me that I get access to, that creates this change once I tap into it and remove all the things that's blocking me from it? What confirms that relationship of the possibility that they talk about in step 3? What confirms?
So we've opened the chat back up. We're gonna try this. So why don't you guys at home answer that question? What is the confirmation of step 3?
So what are we getting on there?
Most people are saying step 11. We've got some people saying steps 4 through 12. Written inventory, desperation and commitment. So the people who are saying the 11th step are correct. Anybody else if you've got a different answer other than step 11, you're a little misinformed or misguided. I don't know if we want to try to.
Yeah, it's not book-based information. It's more fellowship ideas or treatment. Book-based information is the confirmation is step 11. Okay, and then they talk about this process. And then let's go page 60, which is having had step 12. I like how you turn the page, eh? It's a whole new starting of a story. I don't know if that was intentional, but it's kind of interesting, right? A new story has begun.
You want me to read out step 12?
Oh, yeah. Let's not keep anybody in suspense.
Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
So this is something that's picked up speed, and it makes sense to a lot of people. Once you do the steps, this is where a lot of people go, you don't need to work on the steps anymore. The steps are a vehicle to get you a relationship with a power grid, and then you're working on these principles to maintain that. So the first half of how it works talks about the struggles and the inability to get sober unless these things take place. It talks about here on page 59, the things that need to take place for this change to happen. On page 60, they talk about the change happening as the result of these steps. It says it in black and white. And most people read how it works, and sometimes they'll say, as a result. If you interchange those words, a result and the result, does it change the whole meaning of what we just read? Sure it does, because as a result, that means you get all these different results. That's not the purpose of doing this course of action. The most important thing that needs to happen for us is this psychic change or spiritual experience. Otherwise, what's our fate? We will drink again. So once we've had this change through this course of action, they talk about these principles. So now the second half of how it works talks about this relationship that I've formed and the purpose of it. Where to from here? So the first half talks about how do I get access to this power where it's personal to me? What does it look like once I obtain that? And what does the story start to be about? So we'll see as we go through this, it starts to explain what the story becomes once I've had this change.
Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. Not even Tony.
Close though, close. Some days it's close. Some days I go to bed and I think I was so close, I wake up and they move the goalpost again.
We are not saints.
I don't know about that. Some days, you know, I think I see a halo. I don't know.
I spend enough time with you. I spend enough time with you that I can confirm that you are not a saint.
No pending court cases anyway, so it's okay.
And if you need to be reminded, I'll just call your wife and let her know that you need to be reminded.
So let's just carry on, okay?
We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines.
So what's the point? We're willing to go along spiritual lines. We've got the guidelines now through this course of action. We see what creates the change, how I get access to this power, and how it subsides the human condition. So as we go through this, they'll explain these points more and more. Not having the experience with it, I need to use my intellect to see what you're talking about. Once I experience it, then it's no explanation necessary after that. It's kind of like it's like watching somebody drive a car and making it look easy, and then you actually driving a car. It's two different things altogether. So at first, when the big book is kind of like getting your beginners. You go through, you get all the information and allow you to go do your test to get your learner's license. That's what this is kind of like. You get your learner's license, and then the spiritual experience will go do your road test. And once you have your road test, it's about developing all those principles you learned that got you your license. If you don't maintain and develop those principles that got you your license, that's the collective understanding of everybody on the road, you will have to get retested. And what will let you know that you need to do that is not adhering to these principles, and life will let you know. Speeding tickets, impound, dented bumpers. The world around you will let you know that you're not driving the way you're supposed to. And if you continue, then your license will be revoked, and then you'll have to retest again. And that's kind of like this. Once you have a spiritual experience, all you need to do is maintain certain ideas, and every once in a while, maybe every 5 years, do a... What do you need to do every 5 years? You just go in and have it...
Have a refresher?
Not a refresher. Just kind of say, yep, stay on board. Okay, go ahead.
The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas.
Before and after what?
Do you want them to answer in the chat?
Yeah, before and make clear 3 pertinent ideas. Before and after what?
Most people are saying the steps.
Yeah, before and after. Before and after. Make clear that if you're running it and you're going under your own guidance system, you're in trouble. It won't take you long to realize you're in conflict with people, places, and things. If you're running into more than 4 assholes in one day, guess what? Anybody?
Who's the only common denominator in that situation?
Yeah. My wife don't let me watch the news anymore because after the 3rd day of watching news, I start swearing at the TV. I'm starting like, are you people? She says, you watching the news again? So, right, anyways.
Let's find out what these 3 pertinent ideas are. How about that?
Sure.
A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives.
A, that we were alcoholics and could not manage our own thinking.
B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism.
All the condition, suffering, and pain that goes along with that. Anybody?
C, that God could and would if he were sought.
The seeking. So where and how are we to sought or find this power, this thing that's going to cause us relief from ourselves? Where do we find this power? May you find them now. Where is the access to this thing? Where do I got to start looking?
Deep down within.
Yeah, and that's what this book is. So all I need to do is be willing to go through this course of action and apply these principles to my life to get access to this thing that's already within me. How many people would have came up with any of these ideas on their own?
Well, none of us did, or none of us would be here.
Yeah, none of my friends sitting around the Sagamore Hotel in Toronto said, well, you know, Tony, once you get this psychic change or spiritual experience, and you get in touch with this inner resource of strength, that you'll become a person even we would like to hang around with. Anyways, go ahead.
The Sagamore, that sounds just as bad as the Ivanhoe. I can only
the Sagamore,
I bet you that place smelled really bad.
You know what? You can go by the fan and you smell the carpet and the cigarettes and the stale beer. On a good night, you still maybe some leftover from the vomit coming through there. You know you missed a good time. You know those swinging doors you go through and your feet are sticking to the floor and broken glass? You missed something exciting, eh? Anyways.
Those are some of my favorite places. Being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And what do we do? So
they're going to explain it. They're not going to leave us on a hook for nothing. Have they stopped yet and said, what do you think it means? Have they asked you what you think it means yet? So again, it's just gathering all this information. They're talking about here, turn our will and our life over. What's our will in our life? Our thinking and our actions. What's caused us all our problems in our life? Our thinking and our actions. The decisions we make based on our thinking. We'll find out the decisions we make based on self that we're deluded to that place us in a position to be hurt. We'll find that out later. So they're going to talk about just what do we mean by that and just what do we do. Who's going to clarify those 2 points? They are. So I just need to be willing to, again, follow along.
The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success.
So we're going to show us how to be convinced of that. A lot of us are really not convinced of that. You need to go through a process to be convinced of that. We're convinced that we're at step 3, that my alcoholism is going to take me out unless I find a solution to that. And every now and then I get a glimpse that I may be my problem, but I'm sure other people are more to blame. So the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will will hardly be a success. They're going to show us how to come to that conclusion on our own, based on our own story through their recipe.
On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show.
So they're talking about the human condition here, not the alcoholic condition. They're talking about the human race. Most people. They didn't say most alcoholics. Most people. They're talking about the human race here.
Forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great.
Hey, can we get a seconder on that one? Huh? Yeah.
How many of us always think our ideas are the best ideas?
Yeah. I just need a seconder and we're moving forward. No. That's where the 2. There are those 2. The other guy shows up in my mind. That's a great idea, Tony.
I said to myself,
Self, what do you think? Glad you asked. Okay.
Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing.
When I asked my son, what do they mean by it? He says, do you have a list of things you believe that will make you happy? I said, yeah, who doesn't? He says, most people are living life. You have a list that you're working toward that you think will bring you about happiness and contentment, your checklist sobriety. I said, so what do you mean, like various traits? He says, well, what that means is if people are doing what you want, you reward them. If people are not doing what you want, you punish them. And they'll find it a lot better just to do what you want instead of being punished. Nobody like that in here, right? Okay. That's the human trait.
On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is more likely to have varied traits, meaning we're more likely to display both of these types of personalities or behaviors. What usually happens, the show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the plate does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame.
Can we get a show of hands on that one? Yeah. Good. I thought I was alone there, right?
I don't recall ever admitting that I was somewhat at fault, ever.
Yeah. What an order. I can't go through with it.
Yeah. He becomes angry, indignant, and self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only he manages well?
So if you can't see this, that's okay, because me, when I went through this the first couple times before I actually did this process, as the first time I went through this, I said, yeah, that's my girlfriend. Yep, that's her. I'm going to go home and leave this book on the table for her. No wonder I have problems. Look at her. This is her. My brain didn't go, oh my God, that's you, Tony. If you're suffering from a victim of a delusion, who's the only one that don't know you're suffering from it? Anybody ever try to talk to you about something you're doing, you look at them like, what's your problem? Okay. Like you're drinking? No sense of humor? Okay.
Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He is like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter complaining of the sad state of the nation. The minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century. Politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him. And the alcoholic. Wait, best part. And the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, or our self-pity?
How many people have been to a discussion meeting?
Where the topic has been people's resentments and their self-pity?
How to fix self with self.
Yeah.
So that's the difference is when you go to some, after a while catch on that in the beginning, before you go through this process, you don't even know it, but you're problem-oriented. Like, it doesn't click in that you're problem-oriented because you're always seeking this solution to these problems that you're having all the time. So you're focused on self and on all your problems. Those that have been through this have a different focus and a different approach. They talk about their relationship and 12-step work in carrying this message in meetings. They're more focused on carrying this message in meetings than the problems that they're having with self because they have a solution. But if you haven't had that experience, you'd never click into it.
You want to find out what the root of our troubles is?
No, go ahead.
I have a hint. It's not everybody else. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate.
So if you're in that condition, what two thoughts can you trust? So that's why we don't have a slogan that says, figure it out. You know why? Because if you're driven by all these things, who's the only one that don't know you're being driven by it? Us. And so we come in, we sit down, and we think it's another thing that we could figure out. We sit in a couple meetings, we listen, we think we can catch this game or the play, we think we can get ahead of it. I'll just get the right people going, this going, that going, I'll get the lingo going, I get all the talk going. I'm deluded to the fact that I think there's this change based on me going to meetings and picking up the dialogue, picking up the lingo, picking up this stuff, promises, surrender. I'm talking this dialogue, and I even sometimes convince myself that there is change happening because it's just like evangelical sobriety, I call it, right? I create an elusive feeling of change and hope and ideas, but based on nothing other than me. I'm probably the only one in here, right? And then life takes me out. What takes me out is alcoholism returns. And the insanity takes me out because I'm without defense against that first drink because I haven't found a solution to the dilemma called me. All these things are still plaguing me. And by the time I get a glimpse of it, it's too late. Anybody like that here?
Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot.
Extreme example of the human condition, because we're plagued with these things that we're not too sure what it is, but we're a little more damaged than other people because alcoholism has warped our thinking into such a state that we were crippled by self-imposed crisis. We have all these problems, we have all these lies, we have all these we haven't dealt with life, and then we sober up and life starts catching up with us. It's kind of like we're kind of perplexed by the severity of life. Anybody get overwhelmed there? I remember sobering up and start dry heaving. My brain wouldn't let me alone. Like it'd be bedtime and it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm still counting the holes in the ceiling. Like my brain was relentless. It wouldn't shut up. But I was used to the noise. That's what they're talking about here. I need to find a way of finding peace with all this. But I don't know where it's coming from. All I know is I ended up in a shit pile. And I don't know how I got there, how it happened, or how to get rid of it, or get myself out of it. And that's what the rest of the course of action is. These guys are talking in past tense. We see that these things arise out of ourselves. I don't know that yet. And if I was able to see that, then I wouldn't need to do the rest of the course of action. So they're giving me a summary of their example of what they've been through on being convinced that any life run on self-will. So they're kind of doing an outlay of this, and some of it is kind of like, okay, like I was so delusional I didn't know I was delusional. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. I read through this. I know I had a couple problems, but I'm sure other people were more to blame. Once the warrants got taken care of, I got some money, got this, got that. Once I got these things back, I'd be okay. I couldn't see the depth on what they were talking about till I went through the course of action and applied a solution to it. What's your experience with that, Joanne?
Well, that's the very definition of delusional, right? Is an inability to see the truth in things. And I think most of our experience is that we were locked in an idea that a lot of the problems and difficulties we were having at life were coming from outside influences, from people, from jobs, from relationships. It was much easier for us to think about these things as outside circumstances. I don't think it ever occurs to most of us before coming here and going through this process that these problems are actually arising out of self. And we as alcoholics are just an extreme example of that. We're just extreme examples amongst other people who are experiencing the same issues. But we're always the last to think so.
Well, you ever have somebody that is talking a little delusional, they're not really making sense of what they're saying, and you look at them and you give them a really weird look? It's like, and they're convinced what they're telling you is the absolute truth, and you're kind of going, whoa. And then you realize there's been people looking at you the same way. Oh, wait a minute. Like somebody knows what, like I was in and out 11 years. So I became more sicker in the fellowship and more delusional because self was protecting self in a lot of ways, because I kept myself from the truth because I couldn't handle the truth. I think there was a movie like that where you can't handle. So anyways, like as I went along and the more I became in the cups of alcoholism, the worse my life got and the inability to look at it. I sat in a step 8 meeting once with my spot on the 12. I was doing all 12 and 12. This was before the last time I went. One of the times I went out over probably 32 years ago. 31 years sober now. So I'm sitting in a step 8 meeting, and I listen to everybody. Like the least amount of sobriety other than me was 4 years at that time. I think I had 2 months again. And they were all talking about step 8 and the list they made. And I listened to everybody. And then Chuck and Alex go, well, do you want to share? I said, well, I don't really got nothing really to share on step 8. I never did nothing to nobody that didn't have it coming to them. And I said, all I got left is a couple of resentments I got to take care of. That's the only list I got, is these people I got to get even with. Chuck nearly fell off the chair. He couldn't believe I was saying. And that's where Alex called me Tony Montana. I had that name for the longest time, Tony, because I never did nothing to nobody that didn't have it coming to them. Now, is that a little delusional? I didn't think so. It took the 4th step and the 5th step to look back and go, oh my God, what I did to these people. Because
in that process, through that 4th and that 5th step, you begin to see how much you're driven by your own self-delusion, your self-seeking, your fear. And the longer you live with untreated alcoholism, the more driven by these things you are, the more deluded you are, the more fear-driven you are. We're always the last to know. this is the last analysis, right? This is, it's the last place we look.
Yeah, so if you have no idea, that's okay. I had no idea either. And that's the beauty of this thing. And the difference is, before this process, my inability to look at myself would solve. But through a spiritual magnifying glass or a spiritual scope of accessing this power and the recipe they used, how they went through, I was able to face myself for the first time in the light of their experience. And for the first time, I was able to go through all that stuff. So it's pretty wild. And they're leading us into that. Go ahead.
Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us.
So what's this selfishness that they're talking about? We must be rid of this selfishness or it kills us. What is it?
You want them to answer in the chat?
Sure. If we must be rid of it because it's going to kill us, I need to find out what this thing is.
You guys want to answer in the chat?
Or just...
What is the selfishness we must be rid of? Most people are saying ego.
Well, have they talked about ego yet? No. So what they're talking about is my over-focus on me and the world around me to give me satisfaction, security, hope, and ambition. Looking to other people to make me happy, content, joyous, and free. And their inability to do that, me punishing them for not being able to do that. And once I realize that they can't do it, I replace them with something else. Always replacing, seeking, and guiding, looking for happiness outside of me. And blaming other people for the inability to keep me happy, contented, joyous, and free. Nobody like that in here, right? And kind of always coming up a little irritable, restless, and discontent. Always, maybe the world ain't treating me right. And then after resentment, I turn on myself with self-pity, right? And then when I'm done with myself, I think, look what God's doing to me. Nobody like that in this group, right? So the inability to manage my own thinking around me and escape my thinking. So there's no way of entirely, unless I get rid of self, that over-concentration on me, I'm going to kill me by focusing on me. That was fun, eh?
Yeah, let's find out what makes it possible to do this. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to.
So a lot of people miss that. So I can have total freedom from self. The more connected I get to source or connected to this power, the more free I am from myself. I have moments and sometimes long periods where I'm totally free from the bondage of me. I'm living where my feet are. I'm in total peace and happiness and contentment where my life is. A lot of people go, how is this corona thing affecting me? I just go to less meetings. It's really not impacting me on a level that's kind of causing me lost sleep or disconcern or anything like that, because I just know things will be looked after as I go along, right? So they talk about here, total freedom from self. What did it used to take us to have moments of total freedom from self that later caused us total dismay and bewilderment? It used to take a drink. Anybody find moments of freedom from self? And then you get lost in it, and then you wake up one day, and it's 10 years, 5 years, 8 years later, and everything's gone. Right? So you get so lost that it cuts like a boomerang. I think Bill talked about that, didn't he? Cut them all to shreds, right? So this very thing I sought freedom, happiness, and contentment with turned around has now caused me my total demise. So they're saying here you can have a totally new experience, but it's along these lines by accessing this power through spiritual principles.
Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help.
Because what's our problem?
Lack of power.
So where and how am I going to find this power that's going to give me freedom for me?
Deep down within.
And that's what this book is about. So all I need to do is be willing to go through this recipe. That's it. I don't have to figure nothing out. Just do what I'm told. Do what I'm instructed. If, to the best of my ability, just do what's instructed. That's it.
They're actually going to get a little specific here, if you guys want to. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be the director.
Drama of life, I like that. Oh, sorry.
He is the principal, and we are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children.
So if you back that up a bit, if you kind of look at, they're trying to give you an idea here. How you look at it is kind of like those other. So he is the director, our director. What's a director? Somebody who, if you go on a movie set, they're orchestrating in that scene, in that moment. They're telling people where to go and what to, in the moment, in that scene. Not next week, not next month, today, in the here and now. You're present to follow direction
in that moment.
Right? And that way they're able to create the movie. So if you take care of each scene, pretty soon there's a pretty phenomenal movie starts to take place. And how it works, and the problem is you'll suddenly realize that means you've created a new movie, a new theme, a new experience, and then somewhere along the line you'll go, wow, this is not too shabby. How did I get here? One theme, one snapshot at a time, right? He is the principal. What does that mean?
What's the thing? Sorry, are you asking me?
Yeah, no? I thought it was the principal of a school or directing the whole, all the classes. No?
No, it's the important focal point, the person giving direction. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children.
So what's that? No, right after principal, what is that? The comma, dot, and the comma. What is that?
A semicolon?
Yeah, what does that mean?
It means that it's not a completed sentence. There's still more information.
Okay. We're his agents. That's pretty cool. What does that mean?
Well, that we get to be an agent of God.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So what does that look like? Is how many people here had somebody intervene in your life to carry you a message or direct you through a big book study or to a meeting or guide you some form or another? How many people is here as the result of somebody else's efforts? So that would be the agent. So that would be like when you phone into a place, right? Right? So I phone in and say, 1 second, an agent will be right with you. They'll hook you up to carry you through. So like Bill, when Bill was in treatment for the second time, he kind of put that call out to the universe. Ebby showed up in his life. He was an agent that got Bill on the right track. Pretty cool when you think about that. So when we do 12-step calls, when we work with new people, we become the agents of something greater than ourselves. The what do you call those guys that stand in the hotel when you go into for your room in a concierge? Representative of something other than ourselves. Okay?
God's concierge. I like them. Most good ideas are simple. And this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom.
So they just give you an idea. What is a keystone?
It's an important element of a structure. Right. So do you want like a specific or literal?
Yeah, so go ahead.
So if we're building an archway, right? This is the keystone. This piece would be the piece that supports the arch itself. And the arch would not be structurally sound without it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. New and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. So which side on the arch are we on now?
We're on this side.
We're on this side. So they're going to show us how to build this thing within inside of us. Not outside of us, within inside of us that allows us freedom from self somewhere inside. So you have the access to going through this arch within inside of yourself. You've experienced it before, but now they're going to give you the recipe where you're able to recognize it more. So how that was explained to me is nobody in this room, anybody ever feel total despair here?
Yes.
Where you feel like the more despair you feel, the more you get buckled over. Anybody get buckled, your shoulders start it's like you're imploding on yourself. Anybody feel that? And it's shortness, anxiety, and all that other stuff. And you become so focused on you're not breathing well, and you're not even focused on nothing around you anymore. Your hearing starting to going, and you're just consumed with fear. Anybody ever have that?
Yes.
So you see how that experience has you crippled. Then somebody offers you hope, or you have something intervene in that, and you kind of come out of it. Anybody ever come out of it? and you kind of get that feeling of hope. You get rejuvenized from the inside out, where that feeling of despair and loss and hopelessness kind of gets pushed to one side, and you get a new hope and an idea. It's like if you were drowning and you're going under the water, and all of a sudden somebody threw you a life preserver. You'd still have that pain, but you'd have that sense of, I'm going to be okay. When you grab that life preserver, you'd have a different experience than you did the moment before. How many people's had that kind of experience inside of them? So they're saying here, or how many people has ever went to a meeting in total despair? Say, as soon as I get to a meeting, if I could just get to a meeting, I'll be okay. You sit in the meeting, and somewhere along that meeting, something shifts inside of you, where you kind of get the, anybody have those kinds of experiences? So imagine if you could tap into that inside, because those two things are inside of you. Without realizing it, you've passed it from one experience into another. You've gone from the instinct-based into the spiritual-based, which is they're going to give us the recipe for. So they talk about this archway. Step 3 is the decision that we pass to freedom. They're going to show us how to create this thing within inside of ourselves. It's already there, but it's going to get us to harness it, or to acknowledge it, or to build on it, so we have access to it 24/7, 365. That's what they talk about in the second half of how it works. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. What are spiritual principles? Is the idea of governing myself different than I was before the steps. I'm governed by something else. In Bill's story, what was the shift in Bill's story? You see how he was governed by himself. He went through this course of action, and he was to test his newfound thinking with the new God consciousness within. He was in counsel with something other than himself that gave him freedom. And then you notice he never took a drink again, as long as he maintained and practiced these principles and stayed connected, even through the rough going. He was never able to get through those times before, but being willing to practice these principles, stay connected to source this power, and carry this message, it saved him from himself. Pretty cool, eh? So they're going to say, we're going to show you how to do this. And this is what it looks like. So now on page 62, it says, this is the human dilemma. We're going to show you, we're an extreme example of it. We're going to show you this freedom and what it looks like once we pass through this arch. We know you haven't done it yet, but we're going to explain what it looks like on the other side of this arch. And that's what page 63 is, right? When we sincerely took such a position, is our step 3 to do a course of action to have this experience that they talked about in step 11 and step 12. I have to go through it. I have to build it. They talk about later, are the stones properly in place? Is everything, did I mix enough mortar with sand? They talked about that in We Agnostics. What we're building is a spiritual structure, an entity, an energy that we live or we learn to encompass by. You ever feel when your spiritual energy is really good? How many people feel really good? And you feel like your energy is just, you're kind of, it's like all around you. It's kind of, you notice the mountains, the trees, the birds. And then when you're depleted from that energy, you ever notice you don't really notice nothing? And your demeanor, and you can't even stand yourself, never mind anybody else. Your teeth are getting a little longer. Your knuckles are dragging. Yeah. Nobody here, though, right? You ever answer the phone? What? No. What do you want? Nothing. Just want to say hello. No, anyways. You're not like that, are you, Joanne?
No, not at all.
Okay. So now they're going to show you the experience that they had going through this course of action.
When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed.
Not happened, followed.
We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed.
And that kind of goes with the principles here, right? He is the director, we're his agents. He's the father, we're his children. We have a new employer. So when you think about that, it's pretty wild. When these guys explained this to me 31 years ago, it blew my mind how they were talking. To have a new employer, right?
That's the position they're talking about. What position are we now in? We're in a position where we had a new employer, a new director, right? We are now taking direction and governance from something greater than ourselves. That's the position they're talking about. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well.
Not what we wanted. There's a big difference. what we
not
needed.
Following our own plans and designs, following the direction we're now getting from a power greater than ourselves. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life.
So is this a changed person than the person on page 62? Is this the same person?
I think it's also worth mentioning that this is something that the description of this person is experiencing. It's not something that they are exerting themselves to have. They are experiencing as a result of this relationship with something greater than themselves. They are not trying to see what they can contribute more to life. They are finding themselves less and less interested in themselves as a result of this relationship.
And the monkey's off their back. And what's that Gollum? Joe does that really. Precious, yes, precious.
Oh my God! I
was gonna get that tattooed behind my ear. I thought, yes, that guy gotta be an alcoholic who made that. I mean, he's gonna be.
Hello, my precious.
That's Joe. That guy's talking all the. Yes, the ring. One day he loves you, the next minute, yeah, nobody likes you. Nobody. Yeah, and you're like nuts. So this guy,
like the chatter we have inside of ourselves.
That's it. So the monkey's off this person's back now, right? They have a new freedom, new happiness. Self is subsided. It's shifted. They're having a new experience within themselves. Pretty cool stuff, right?
As we felt new power flow in.
What's our dilemma? Lack of
power.
Not lack of thinking, not lack of direction, not lack of ideas, not lack of will, lack of power. Because we're very strong-willed people. I mean, normal people wouldn't tolerate as much as we've tolerated for the longest period of time that we tolerated. It takes a really special person to be able to put yourself through the things you put yourself through and still be willing to do it again. No,
as we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter.
So what happened first, the peace of mind or the access to the power?
The access to this power.
So where and how were we to find this power to have this same experience? Because, you could sit around and talk about the experience. It's like people who win the lottery and they talk about how they spend the money. Listen, I'll know how to spend the money. How did you get it? How do I get that so I could experience what you're talking about? It's like the person that just came from the buffet talking about what a great buffet it was and you haven't eaten in 2 days. Just show me where the buffet is. I can figure out how to eat. Right? So they're saying here, hey, as the result of, not the sandwich tray, as the result of the buffet, right? The main source, the main ingredients, the whole purpose of this thing, we get to enjoy life beyond anything we could ever imagine. And they realize it's a direct proportionate to access to this power. Right? So they realize as this power decreases, self starts showing up again. And as the power increases, we get a lot less self being our dilemma. Pretty cool stuff, right? It's like two big vases with only one vase could be filled at a time. One goes from one side to the other. It's either filled or depleted. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a couple of people mentioning that these are third step promises, and they're not third step promises. They're the result of having access to this power. They're describing what the experience of this whole program of action, what you receive on the other side of this whole program of action. They're talking about being in such a position. We gain this position, we gain this relationship by going through the program of action through the entire 12 steps. It's not something we experience in the third step. They're describing what it was like and what it's like now for them.
Because if you did experience this in step 3, then you wouldn't need to do the rest of the steps.
It would be a 3-step process if we experience this in the third step.
So that's another form of delusion. I call that evangelical sobriety. If I can get something by doing nothing, that's an old idea. I could fabricate enough. Anybody is just like, the mind is very tricky. So this is why we have a basis of course of action that we get to kind of gear our life. So where are you in the process? Well, I'm on step 4, or I'm on step 11. Can you show me what you're doing to talk about as the result of these steps? Can you show me what you did to experience what you're experiencing? So George and these guys, I talk about this great experience I was having. They said, oh, can you show me how to get it? No, I couldn't show you how to get it. So I'd fabricate pink cloud and all these ideas thinking I had something by really doing nothing. So if I can get this experience in step 3, why would I need to do the rest of the steps? So like exactly what Joanne said, this is a summary of what they experienced through the course of action.
I think it's important to mention that it makes sense that they would put this description, they would put this summary right as you're making your decision, because they want to say, look, this is what the result of making this decision and going through the rest of the course of action is going to be. It makes the decision a no-brainer. I conceded to my innermost self that I'm suffering from a problem that no human power can alleviate. I need access to this power. The way to gain access to this power is to go through the remaining course of action. That's the decision that I'm making in step 3. The result of going through the course of action is the summary and the description that they have on page 63 here. It's to entice you to, yes, make this decision, the decision to go through the rest of the steps.
And that's why they say we are now at step 3. Remember, the whole purpose of this thing was to talk about, they talked about back here on page 60, that just what do we mean by that and just what do we do? They showed you what they mean by that. Now they showed you what they did. Right? Now they're going to say, we are now at step 3. Meaning, if you want what we have, we're going to show you how to get what we just talked about. We're going to show you how to formulate this relationship to get access to power, that you can enjoy all these things. We were reborn. We had a psychic change or spiritual experience. I didn't never like that terminology, kind of reborn, but it kind of reborn to renew or to kind of have a psychic change or spiritual experience as the result of these steps. I got taught that too. A lot of people get taught, oh, these are the 3rd step promises. Then it would have said, these are the 3rd step promises, wouldn't it?
Yes, it doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that.
It says, when we sincerely took such a position, the position they described at the bottom of page 62, as a result of this course of action, not as a result of reading page 63.
It's just like, anybody remember high school or just started dating, or the first time you became aware of the opposite sex, and then you kind of seen somebody that gave you a bit of attention, and you became kind of obsessed with the idea of, wow, wouldn't it be nice to go out with them? How fantastic. You're forming a one-sided relationship. Anybody have those things? The other people may not even know that you're alive, but you have already started this relationship. So it's very real, these endorphins, these feelings, these ideas, and everything's fantastic, and you think, wow. But nothing's changed. Nothing's even happened. It's a one-sided thing. And that's what looking at this and reading it without the experiences. You go, wow, this is the 3rd step promises. Well, are you experiencing these? No, it's an idea. Right? So this is kind of cool. We're now at step 3.
We were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, the victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
So this is interesting. Think about it this week. Read this again. What this is actually a summary of the whole course of action. It's a beginning and conclusion. It's a kind of our hopes to obtaining these things. And as the result of these steps, we will experience everything that they're talking about. This is like a kind of abbreviation of the whole course of action. It's a summary of what lies ahead. It's not what's happening right now, because I don't have the means or the recipe to do these things. They talk about the bondage, taking away, better doing thy will, taking away my difficulties, having victory over them, help of thy power, thy love, thy way of life. They talk about this as a summary. By the time we experience all this, we'll see we will just be looping in 11. By the time we experience all this, will be as the result of this course of action. So what makes us say that? We thought
We thought, well, before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him.
So abandon and surrender, is it the same thing?
No.
So abandon, what does abandon mean?
In this context, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. It means to hand ourselves over to the care of.
Yeah, our thinking.
Abandon self.
Yeah, it's like when they say abandon ship. You're moving toward a new vessel or a new idea. To stay where you are would mean death. Abandon means we have two alternatives. I'm going to move toward this alternative. Well, how do I do that? Well, we're going to show you how to do this decision. Right? The decision is just a decision. I'm making a decision to do the rest of the work. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we could abandon. Mean not hold on to any of our old ideas, move in the direction that I'm being asked to. What's God's will for me is to do the rest of the work. Because if I knew what God's will was for me, I wouldn't need to do the rest of the steps. If I had this relationship in 3 that people suggest, then I wouldn't need to do the rest of the steps. I'd never have a single problem again if I had this relationship in step 3, would I? Right? So then they talk about, I need to experience this before I could carry it to other people. So how do I experience it? Well, that's what the rest of the steps are for. We thought, well, making sure. So it's kind of like this. Maybe some of you guys are from the States. Some places they have a draft. When you get drafted into the army, you're there against your own will. It doesn't matter. Here in Canada, it's volunteer. So what this is kind of saying is, I've weighed what's being asked of me. I'm signing up. I see the benefit of aligning myself with this power to save me from me. It's kind of like, I like this analysis. During the Second World War, Germany was slaughtering the rest of the world. Like no one entity or one group of people seemed to be able to beat them. So when the States got drawn into it, they realized that they couldn't beat this on their own. So like addiction, they couldn't beat Germany on their own. So they had to join alliances with the rest of the world to overcome this power. And that's kind of like us. We're kind of doing an assessment here. There's no way I'm going to beat this. What I need to do is align myself, get an alliance with this power where it's personal to me to get access to overcome this thing that's killing me. Does that kind of make sense? That made sense to me.
Yes. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. The wording was, of course, quite optional, so long as we express the idea, voicing it without reservation.
As long as we express the idea. What idea? Of these things that are possible, that I'm going to turn my will and my thinking, express the idea. The idea of what? Of pursuing the spiritual way of life. It's an idea at this point in time. It's not a factual event. It's an idea that I'm going to move toward this new direction. I'm going to abandon the course of action I'm on in my life to move in a new direction. Does that kind of make sense? So I'm making this conscious decision. I'm moving this way to the alternative that's being presented to me.
This was only a beginning, though, if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a very great one, was felt at once. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us.
So, what confirms our decision in step 3?
Do you want me to answer or do you want them to answer?
Yeah, so somebody will go up to you and say, hey, how do you know you've done step 3? How do you know you've done step 3? If anybody asked you that, what would you tell them? Are you putting it in the chat?
Yeah, you guys answer in the chat. What's the confirmation of completing step 3? Some people are saying step 11. Some people are saying step 4.
So the book says it's actually what confirms my decision is starting step 4. right? Because I'm making a decision that I need to obtain this psychic change or spiritual experience through this relationship. How am I to get this? That's what this book is about. So how do I get this arch? How do I get this freedom? I need to move through the same course of action that they took in order to get what they got. What confirms that is step 4, because step 3 in itself is just an idea. Even though it made me feel good, it's just like, if you were stuck out at sea for a couple of days and your food was diminishing and you're on a lifeboat and it was you and 3 other people, right? So there's the alcoholic, the addict, and a normal person in this lifeboat, and they're looking for airplanes, they're looking for some sign. Then all of a sudden they seen a ship going by in the horizon. Would everybody start getting really excited about the idea of the ship being there?
Yes.
The alcoholic and the addict would be screaming, "Yay, we're saved, we're saved." The normal person would go, "They don't know we're here yet." Right? They have no idea we're here. We know that they're there, but they don't know we're here. We need to get to that vessel in order for our lives to be saved, whatever, like to be free from the predicament that we're in. We need to get their attention. So step 3 is the attention, but I need to get in that ship or that other cruiser to get me out from where I am.
That would be the confirmation of making that decision to get on that ship, is that you would be in the process of getting on that ship or standing on the deck of the other ship. So it's a little more blunt than that. The confirmation of making a decision in step 3 looks like putting pen to paper in the instructions in step 4. It's not starting a step 4 or thinking about a step 4 or reading about a step 4 or waiting to talk to somebody about a step 4. It looks like pen to paper. That's what it looks like.
So this week, think about your decision, right? What's being asked here of you? And are you ready to move on? Abandon yourself to the idea of this course of action was being presented to do what they did in order to have the same experience they had, exactly laid out by the first 100 men and women, to have this freedom that they talked about in page 63 is this experience that happens as the result of these steps. The 3rd step, prayer, is a summary of what's ahead of us if we choose to continue on with this course of action. Did you want to do 7th tradition?
Yeah, hi guys. We're rounding our last few minutes here of the workshop. I'm just going to chat a little bit about 7th tradition. For those of you who are not familiar with our 7th tradition, it states that every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. In keeping with this tradition, it is the responsibility of groups to support themselves via contributions. District 40 inside of Area 79 has been kind enough to allow the Big Book Study to operate under their remote communities account, which is where you are right now. And we thank them for that. I think that they do collect their own 7th tradition via their own group or meeting that starts at 8 p.m. Almost right after the Big Book Study tonight, so stick around for that. But more importantly, if you want to continue practicing this very important tradition, it might be a good reason to know why. Why is it important to continue practicing our 7th tradition? It might seem to a lot of you like a lot of groups aren't convening and they're not meeting right now. They're probably not paying rent. That's not actually true. A lot of groups are still paying rent, even though those meetings can't convene, to support local Alano clubs, local sober clubs, local churches. Your intergroup office is still fielding 12-step calls and redirecting current AA members to find online meetings. They're also stocking needed literature. Your local districts are hosting Zoom meetings and telephone remote community meetings, and they're also still providing a link to your area delegate. Our group conscience needs to continue, especially now in keeping with our 2nd tradition. Your area is still attached to the General Service Conference, and they are still making sure that board members and General Service Conference members are informed about what's going on in your area. I think probably the most important element I might talk about is our General Service Office in New York. I think some of you are from New York, are right in the depths of what's going on, but our staff are still showing up every day to the General Service Office. That wheel is still spinning. They continue to work to support all levels of service. Literature is still being distributed. Calls are still being answered. Online platforms are still being maintained. And some of the staff at the General Service Office are doing that despite the fact that their family members are sick with COVID-19. And some of the staff members there have actually already experienced family losses. So, in an effort to make sure that we remain self-supporting, I'm going to put some links in the chat here of ways that you can directly contribute to the General Service Office. And if you'd like to find out how to contribute locally in your own districts and intergroups, I encourage you guys to reach out because many volunteers are still showing up to make sure that the wheel keeps spinning. Thanks.
Awesome. And Tuesday, we're going to start right on the 4 steps. So download the 4-step sheets. It's going to be really in-depth. It'll be a real game changer for you. Like it will be in a way that the book lays out that will kind of show through the rest of your sobriety for the rest of your life. It's a real game changer, right? For those that wish, we're going to actually close with the 3rd step prayer. For those who want to do the 3rd step prayer with us in a group, page 63, make our decision. We'll confirm that decision Tuesday. With the worksheets, you can download them, see Joe or Joanne, and get the worksheets from them in regards to the 4-step. Did you want to add anything on that, Kimberly? Are we good? So for those who wish, we're on page 63 who would like to confirm their decision with us today. We're going to look at page 63. When ready, we said something like this. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Amen. And may God keep you safe till we meet again. Thank you for having us in your homes.